Hello everyone, my name is Gabby and today I just want to briefly talk about something that has been a thing that's been in the fandom for a while now. It's not particularly new, but I realized when I was looking at it, there was one thing in particular I got out of it and something that's kind of perhaps a bit unique to me and something that I don't think, now thinking about it, I don't think I ever actually said out loud to anyone for any actual kind of video or anything like that, so I just kind of wanted to explain it. So a few weeks ago, we got a translation from a random little Toriyama tidbit Q&A thing in an issue of Psycho Jump. And one thing that was probably the most interesting thing about it was that Toriyama was talking about this sort of like requirements of going Super Saiyan. And one thing that he kind of created, or whether it's a retcon or it's not, or it's I don't know, but one thing that was in that little Q&A was that he was talking about things called sort of like S cells. Essentially, kind of the idea that there's kind of like a biological reasoning for going Super Saiyan, and that's essentially that it's related to how many S cells you have. And when you have a lot of S cells, and then you have like some kind of trigger, the trigger will basically cause the S cells to do something, and then that's Super Saiyan. I know some people were making comparisons to midi-chlorians and yada yada, and there were a lot of kind of differing responses to it. I personally, at this point, I don't really have much of a good or bad or whatever kind of thing opinion, and the chances of this showing up in the main series are probably pretty small. I mean, nobody has started calling Android 18 Lazuli, so the chances of it actually becoming a big important plot point in Dragon Ball Super are pretty small, so I don't really think it's worth that much talking about. But the thing that I found most interesting about it is that the whole S cell phenomenon, the way that Toriyama kind of worded it, seems like it was essentially like a really kind of proper confirmation to the things that I was sort of thinking about, and in fact the out-of-universe ways that I was always kind of rationalizing Super Saiyan for a very long time. See, I've got a video series on this channel which was about tropes shonen and Dragon Ball, where it's essentially I was looking at a lot of the very common trope story elements that show up in the Dragon Ball series and sort of how they were used and why exactly they were used. I haven't really done an episode for a while, partially because I kind of ran out of tropes that I was really, really interested in talking about, but the last episode I did was one on the trope of beware the nice ones. And in that video, I kind of explained that the Super Saiyan, or at least the way the Super Saiyan was initially presented, was that it kind of very much sort of tied into these ideas of the kind of story trope, out of universe sort of story plot device of beware the nice ones. Essentially, for those who don't know, Beware the Nice Ones is essentially this kind of story idea where if you have a character who's very sort of gentle or kind or sort of pacifistic, if they get put into a situation where they specifically kind of almost lose their temper and kind of get enraged, then it will essentially kind of cause something very big and dramatic to happen. It's kind of a sort of in-universe and out-of-universe thing where it's a sort of because that kind of character is not a kind of character who would get really angry very often, it means that if they're in a situation where something so terrible happens that even they are forced to get angry, it's kind of like the plot sort of privileges and allows this thing that wouldn't normally happen to happen. And because that thing that wouldn't normally happen happens, it kind of has much more power than anything else. In layman's terms, it's basically like when the kind-hearted person gets angry, they're going to be really strong or really competent or definitely do something really important to the story, pretty much because of that whole idea that it wouldn't normally happen. I was explaining that trope kind of really applies to two things. One of them is basically Gohan's character from the start almost up until the end of the series, and the other thing is essentially the Super Saiyan, or at least the Super Saiyan in the way the Super Saiyan happened to Goku. Because basically the way that Goku presents the Super Saiyan to Frieza, the way that he actually explains the Super Saiyan to Frieza, is the idea that it is a pure-hearted soul awakened by rage. And the way he kind of puts those two together, it's kind of this idea that's but a pure-hearted soul wouldn't normally actually experience rage, or at least not that kind of rage like Goku experienced towards Frieza when Frieza killed Krillin. So it's because Frieza killed Krillin, because Frieza put Goku in that situation where he would normally be pretty happy-go-lucky and now he's really, really pissed off, that's what triggered the Super Saiyan to happen. And so for years, basically, my kind of headcanon explanation of the Super Saiyan, just judging by the way that Goku explained it, was that the Super Saiyan was essentially that kind of trope, but like turned into an actual plot point with kind of an explanation behind it. And I'd been thinking that for years, and interestingly, this whole S cell stuff basically ties into this exact same idea. It kind of basically confirms that theory in a way. Because what Toriyama says in the Q&A is that really any Saiyan could become a Super Saiyan, but only really if they have enough sort of S cells in their bodies. And the other thing that Toriyama says is that the most effective way to increase somebody's S cells is by having a gentle spirit. So essentially, by being a nice person. By being a nice person, you have more S cells, which means that it's much more likely for something to trigger those S cells, as in like something like rage, and then that makes you a Super Saiyan. So yeah, basically, Super Saiyan being Beware the Nice Ones is pretty much confirmed by Toriyama. And I do kind of find it really kind of interesting. Like, it's a really interesting idea because it is one of those explanations that, like, actually does work on both the kind of, like, yeah, in-universe, like, this is an explanation based on, like, biology, or at least Saiyan biology, kind of in terms of the internal logic of the series, and also in that kind of out-of-universe thing. It's like the idea of a kind character getting angry, doing something really explosive and powerful and important, like, that is not something that Dragon Ball created. In fact, it's a very common kind of storytelling device, but here Toriyama's basically, like, taking that storytelling device and then also giving an actual in-universe reason for it, which I don't normally see happen in lots of stories. I think it's honestly a very interesting idea. Like, people can talk about midichlorians all they want if they want. Like, I'm not saying that you have to like the plot point. It's obviously a little bit dumb in some ways, but I do just kind of find that interesting, because it's like, it does actually kind of make sense on both levels, and it sort of confirms the things that I was saying a few months ago. I mean, if somebody put a gun to my head and then told me to give them a good explanation as to what the Super Saiyan was and how it worked, I probably would still default to the whole, like, Beware the Nice Ones thing, and it'd probably still piss off a lot of people because they'd be like, Gabby, that's not an answer. That's, like, talking about narrative structure. That's not an actual in-universe answer. But hey, I guess now I can still also bring up the S cells, and it can basically please both worlds, hopefully. So yeah, at the end of the day, it's not such a big, important topic that's really going to change everything forever, but it is one of the few times where Dragon Ball came out with a random piece of information that honestly did kind of fit in with the strange way that I look at the series, so I thought it was something worth talking about. I don't know what you guys necessarily think of the SLs. Maybe you like it, maybe you hate it. I honestly don't know. I didn't really check much of the fandom reactions to it, but, no matter what, it's like, it's something that didn't need to exist, but I am getting at least some enjoyment out of it, so that's a good thing, right? So this is Gabby signing out, and goodbye, guys.